Anna. I'm excited to talk to you today about your brand new book, The Red Hot Blues Chanteuse. Tell us about this book.
Oh, CV, it's a very fun book. It's a historical mystery because that's what I write. And it takes place in San Francisco in 1919, just after the end of World War I, between the phases of the Spanish influenza. And it's about vaudevillians, entertainers, performers of magic and song and dance and gymnastics and dog tricks who traveled across America, Canada, and actually the rest of the world, performing in different cities. So it's about a troupe of vaudevillians, and of course, our heroine is Viola Vermillion, who is the red hot blues chanteuse. She is a singer. Her piano player slash lover gets murdered in the balcony of the Pantages Theater in San Francisco with her gun. So obviously she is a suspect, and obviously she needs to find out who really murdered her lover. And that's how the story starts. And then it goes all throughout San Francisco. It goes into the city of Alameda. We go on to the island of Alcatraz, which at that time was a military prison. And I try and take readers on a fun view of the Bay Area with song. There's lots of music going on because Viola, as she entertains, of course, has to sing what's going on in her life.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
You and I talked about this treasure trove of vaudeville memorabilia that I inherited. And I inherited it probably 30 years ago, and it's the recordings, photographs, postcards, scrapbooks, and other memorabilia like playbills of a real red hot blues chanteuse, Elsie Clark, who is actually an Australian who came over to America and sang her heart out in Pantages and Orpheum theaters around the country. I inherited all of her goodies from my stepmother, and the scrapbooks were just so interesting and so fascinating about her life on the road. She did fun things like she went to the beach, she went to the theater, she went all over the world. And I just thought, well, what if she was actually involved in a murder? So my love of this vaudeville character and my love of murders led me to write this book.
So, your first novel, Fanny Newcomb and the Irish Channel Ripper, took place during the Gilded Age in New Orleans. And this one takes place during the vaudeville era in San Francisco. Can you tell us a little bit about writing in these two different eras?
Fanny Newcomb takes place in 1889, and Red Hot takes place in 1919. So there's a 30-year difference. As much as I loved writing Fanny Newcomb and I wanted to write more about her, her life as a woman in 1889 New Orleans is pretty dour, pretty confined. And I wanted to write about a heroine who could do whatever she wanted to do. And although 1919, of course, women couldn't vote and prohibition was coming in, and there were still a lot of constraints on a woman's life, the war had actually liberated women a little bit. So I knew that if I chose a vaudeville star as my heroine, that I could write a female who kind of did whatever she wanted to do and could live out her dreams. And she could also, have a little romance, and a little more romance than I could really write about a woman in 1889. So for me, writing about 1919 was pretty liberating, and there were a lot more options to choose for a woman's life at that time.
Well, they're definitely very, very different characters. So I know you live right across the bay from San Francisco. So did you spend a lot of time in the city doing research?
No. And that's because I was writing during COVID, and I couldn't go into the public library. I couldn't take Bart over to check out some sites. I had to do a lot of research from my computer. So I delved into the archives I could find, and I also went to YouTube. I had to go there to find out how the cable car would go over San Francisco, cable car ride that I've taken probably 20 times in my entire life, from Market Street, where the Pantages Theater is, to Fisherman's Wharf. I needed to make sure how I described it was absolutely correct, so I would watch a lot of YouTubes on taking that cable car ride. I also had to talk to my husband because he was a volunteer at Alcatraz for about 23 years. So he had very intimate knowledge about how to get to Alcatraz from Fisherman's Wharf in 1919. That's kind of how I did my research. I really wished I could have gone into San Francisco. Although having lived across from San Francisco for years, I'm pretty familiar with it, but it's really fun to walk down the same streets. And even the hotel where I put the Vaudevillians, I believe, is still there. So I wanted to go past that hotel, but not with COVID.
Well, YouTube is a treasure trove of information, and imagine having your research person
Yeah,
talk to living right with you.
yeah. I had YouTube was great.
So, what was your favorite part about writing this book?
It really was being able to put voice to a woman in 1919 who's been through the war, who's actually survived the Spanish flu, and who's had multiple losses during the war, and to really think about how her life was. And there's a little parallel to, how we were constrained during COVID, but she's also very lively. She's very ambitious. She wants to be the best in vaudeville, and I can relate to that. I'm not sure how many ambitious, talented heroines we really read about these days. She does certainly have faults. She's not perfect, but learning her faults and seeing her grow through the story, I really enjoyed that.
So, what's happening with Viola in the future?
Well, she does have more stories coming out. She and Jimmy are in New Orleans, so the home of Fannie Newcomb. So now I get to write about New Orleans in 1919, and that's a lot of fun, and stage life there and regular life there. So, of course, there is another murder in another theater. This time it's the Orpheum Theater. In the first book, I started another plot about a red leather notebook, and that goes on in book 2 and actually finishes in book 3. So book 2 is what I'm working on now. It's called The Magnolia Voodoo Brawler, which is Jimmy's name. That's the name of his band, and he's actually the big brawler. And then book 3 is going to take our heroine and hero up to New York City, where they will come to grips with Viola's ambition to play the Palace Theater, which for any vaudevillian in America was like it. If you make it at the Palace Theater, you have made it.
Well, I can only imagine what the jazz scene must be like in New Orleans.
It's the story starts in the Bon Temps Cafe, which is a jazz venue right at the top of the French Quarter. And what's interesting about this time in New Orleans is that it's not only jazz that's ruling; they're still ruled by the tango. Because the tango swept America and the rest of the world, the Argentine tango, back in like 1912, 1913, and there were blocks and buildings in New Orleans dedicated to the tango, so much that it was called the Tango Belt. So we do go into the Tango Belt also, in addition to visiting the jazz scene there.
How incredible. Well, I am really looking forward to it. And yeah, hearing about the Tango Belt, that's going to be really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's who knew?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Who knew Tango Belt?
Well, thank you, Anna. I'm looking forward to your next book, and definitely the Red Hot Blues Chanteuse was a joy to read.
Thank you very much. It was so good to talk to you today, CV.